John Scheft will answer it. Can parents/grandparents give alcohol or pot to their kids in homes regardless of their kids' ages? And we'll buzz through these if we can.
All right, so good morning. I'm John Scheft. I'm an attorney. I'll be playing the part of Chief John Carmichael today. Can I get a gun in a uniform up here, please? So the short answer is yes. You are allowed to give your children alcohol, and you're allowed to give them marijuana and marijuana products if you're a parent or a grandparent. But nobody else can do it, and you can't give it to anybody else if they're on your property. We call that the social host law. Basically, what's very interesting about it, two things. It covers marijuana, marijuana products, which is anything made from the cannabis plant, whether it's an ointment or a tincture or a food product or a beverage or a concentrate. The other thing is you can't give anybody marijuana accessories, and accessories is what we now call paraphernalia. So if I have a 15-year-old neighbor come over and I hand him a crappy little ceramic marijuana pipe, that's a violation of the law, right? That's a criminal offense. I can give it to my kid, I can give it to my grandchild, but I can't give it to anybody else. And the other thing you have to understand about social host law, I talk to people around the state about this, it's not only supplying, you can't allow it. And allowing means that you're consciously aware of it. So we found this with alcohol. There were parents who would say, hey, I hosted a graduation party. I said no alcohol. You know those crazy kids, they spike the punch anyway. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to end it. If you don't end it, you're committing a criminal offense. And one last thing about social host law. It applies to anybody of any age. So we had a young kid, sophomore, home from Syracuse on vacation. His parents go out, he opens up the liquor cabinet. He plies booze to his 16-year-old friends. They leave, they get in a car, they drive up on the sidewalk, they kill a 16-year-old boy, and they cripple a 17-year-old girlfriend. Well, the police traced the source of the alcohol back to this 19-year-old boy. He was indicted, he was prosecuted, he was sent to jail for a year. And what he said was, well, wait a minute, I'm not a social host. This only applies to adults. And the appeals court said, no, it applies to any host of any age. So when we talk to parents, we talk to grandparents, anybody, say, be aware, right? You're responsible for this. Criminally, you're responsible for it civilly, too.
Okay, so I have a few questions. They're all kind of the same theme, and they're all for Dr. Turncliff. Questions from people wanting to know what parents and schools can do to talk to their teen. So what things can parents and communities do? And the second question is about if there's any concern with young people consuming CBD products, if there's a difference between that.
So first I'll address what can communities, parents, kind of those different sector members and the individuals who fall into those different rings of the social ecology. So if you aren't currently engaged with a community coalition, I would say that's a great place to start because many community coalitions already have kind of the network there to address the different sectors and have ongoing programs and strategic plans for doing that. I did see a question specifically about positive youth development and how to support positive youth development and kind of a framework for that. I can say that our community, I see Tracy sitting over there, is using Search Institute's positive youth development and the 40 developmental assets as a framework and a model for that. And I personally absolutely love it and have looked into it. And if you're not familiar with the Search Institute, I would say go take a look at their website, look at their developmental asset model. Yes, is that, okay. And then the second was about CBD products. So this is a really interesting area, I think. And I think as Chief Carmichael touched on, the really concerning part here is being able to trust that what is labeled CBD only is actually CBD only. So I think I don't, unfortunately, have the confidence to say that when youth are going in, and I've heard even at a convenience store, and purchasing CBD gummy bears, that is only CBD. I have no confidence that that is what's in it. So that would be probably my biggest concern. And the other piece is we actually don't really know what happens when the studies aren't there, the data isn't there, to know what happens when adolescents use CBD. I mean, I think there is some evidence to show that there may be medical value for CBD products, but kind of as I mentioned, and I didn't show, but the endocannabinoid system plays an important role throughout the body. So there are biological and physiological processes that those natural endocannabinoids play in the whole systems. So we just really don't know what happens when you add in that, what we call exogenous CBD into that system.
And there was one little question too, is it permanent damage when the brain is damaged due to?
Yeah, so there are some research studies showing that the effects of THC, marijuana use, but I would say THC, on the adolescent brain are permanent. And some of those are imaging studies, and it depends, I think, on whether it was heavy, regular use, what was used, and I think there are a lot of nuances that are yet to be worked out. There was a study that was just published that showed that the effect, there was a meta-analysis that showed that the effects of kind of those cognitive effects from cannabis use last 72 hours. So that was a meta-analysis, and so that means that the methodology of the studies that were included in that meta-analysis were all different. So there's really not a good way to say, well, what does this mean, right? And over the long term, and was that from a single use and things like that. But what that does say is that if a student uses marijuana or THC products on the weekend, they're still impaired when they go to school on Monday, maybe on Tuesday, maybe on Wednesday. And that's if they were only using on the weekend and they're not using daily. So I think that those are just some of the complicating factors to think about.
Let's see, there's a few here for Jody. Can you report which communities, how many, have banned retail sale out of the 351? And conversely, if you have that are still selling retail, however your data shows you'd like to report that.
This is changing really rapidly, and we have a small group just looking at links in the news every day, trying to share information. There have been 80 communities that have opted out completely already, gone through the whole process, which used to be, anyway, it's a complicated process, but they have opted out on retail sales, but also on grow houses and cultivating innovation, and on manufacturing, which manufacturing is the edibles and the dabs and the wax and the concentrates. And then also on just, they've opted out on testing as well, which supports the industry, and they're putting in language now in some of the ordinances that says, or any other marijuana-related establishment, because what comes next, the next wave of the activists is to open up pot bars, cannabis clubs, consumption sites. So some communities are preemptively saying, no, we're not going to want those in our community either. So I think about 80 have opted out completely, and well over 100 more have moratoriums right now, trying to figure out what the heck to do, trying to move forward. A lot of people haven't been looking at this hard for 3 years. And that's about how long it takes to understand it. So now we have 2/3 of the Commonwealth now either have with permanent prohibitions on all of the industry establishments and or moratoriums on that activity. And like I said, it's changing daily. We're in town meeting season right now.
And another quick one, Jody. Please explain the social equity consultant John Getman's background.
All right, I don't know a ton about this, but conversations are happening in prevention circles. John Carmichael showed you those 25 target cities. The Cannabis Commission targeted 25 cities for preferred priority approval for marijuana licenses. And it was based on a paper done by a guy named John, what's his name? Getman. And you can take a look at that paper. It's up there on the Cannabis Control Commission's website. I don't know a ton about him. He put up his credentials as being affiliated with Shenandoah University, but he's also a leader in NORML, which is an advocacy group over the past 30 years that have worked on the normalization and legalization of cannabis and THC. So it comes from a very specific point of view from one guy writing one paper. And I don't know more than that. If anybody else does, that would be great. But that's the impression I have. And you can take a look at the paper yourself and see it's not scientifically based. It's not based in deep data. It's based on a point of view of someone who was a national director of NORML.
We have two that are related to the CBD gummies that Chief talked to us about. One says, do the stores not need a license, question mark? Are there Board of Health checks? And another, how can they be legally sold in convenience stores to our youth? Do you have to be a certain age to buy them?
So let me give you a quick summary of the law related to CBD oil, because what happened when marijuana was legalized is they made a distinction between marijuana and hemp. And hemp is basically regulated now by the Department of Agriculture, and the basic definition of hemp is it can be stalks and seeds and derivatives, but it has to have no more than 0.3% THC. So the loophole that people who create CBD oil edibles and products have grabbed on is, well, CBD oil is hemp, and you don't need a license to sell hemp from the Cannabis Control Commission. But what is happening now is the Department of Agriculture is catching up, and they are saying you do need a license to sell hemp from us, and all hemp that you sell has to have been tested at every level of production, at the growing, at the manufacturing, before it can be sold at retail. We actually have a meeting tomorrow, John and I and other people, with the Cannabis Control Commission and the Department of Agriculture to really shut down this loophole. My hope is that they're going to do two things. Number one, no sales of CBD oil that comes from out of state. Virtually 100% of the CBD that your kids are buying that are being sold by convenience stores was all manufactured out of state. The nature of Massachusetts law is we don't want any CBD from out of state because it hasn't been tested and certified. The other thing is we want to have an avenue where if you do sell CBD, you have to have a license from the Department of Agriculture, and if it's over 0.3%, it's not hemp, and you're a criminal dealer if you don't have a license from the Cannabis Control Commission. So our hope is we will shut that down. But there also is a larger issue which the Cannabis Control Commission and the Department of Agriculture have to deal with, and that is CBD oil is talked about as a medical remedy. So should it even be available for retail sale? That's the other issue. Or should you have to have a medical card and get it from a medical marijuana dispensary? At the very least, people under 21 should have to have a medical card or it shouldn't be accessible. So stay tuned. But the good news is the Massachusetts government cares about it, and I think they will do something quickly because that's a huge problem now.
Thank you. Is marijuana with THC used for any type of medical issues?
Do you want me to take that? Okay. So, and I think I saw a similar question about this as well. So yes, I think when you talk about, and if you look at the scientific literature, no major medical society endorses medical marijuana as a treatment. Because there's a process, and I think Jody touched on it, for approval of medications, and we just don't know enough about the risk benefit. And I think we will see that start to change, and there are 2 cannabis-based medicines on the market, and another, I think, just was approved.
Pharmacies.
They are pharmacies. But if you're talking about the scientific literature, there is some evidence for low THC with CBD that has medical benefit. I have looked and I have found absolutely no scientific studies, credible scientific evidence that high THC products have medical benefit. So I think when you start to think about what is being sold, and even in medical dispensaries, and I went head to head with a CEO of a medical dispensary that wanted to open in my community, and I said, are you willing to limit the potency of the products that you're going to sell in your dispensary? Because I have dug into the literature, I've been a pain analyst, and really studied this, and I said there's no evidence that the very high potency concentrates and products that have very little, if any, CBD have any medical benefit. And he said, no, I wouldn't be willing, because there are people that I think can get benefit and PTSD and all this stuff. Well, if you actually dig into the PTSD literature, it shows that over the long term, that those products can make PTSD worse. So I think there's just a lot that is still unknown about, the effects and how much THC and how much CBD and in what ratios are most useful.
There's a question. States that legalized marijuana had 25% fewer opioid-related deaths. Why?
I can start that, then Jody can chime in. So at the same time that people are doing these studies and looking at this, there are changes happening around the prescription opioids, right? As we know, even in Massachusetts, new regulations are being put in place that are clamping down on prescriptions. So there are researchers and scientists who are calling these data points an ecological fallacy, which it comes back to association, correlation does not equal causation. So there are other factors that need to be considered that play a role that are happening at the same time that are contributing to a decrease in prescription opioids. So as we showed in Colorado, there's still been an increase in opioid-related deaths related to heroin, even with the loosening of marijuana policy. So it's more that the prescription opioid-related deaths may be decreased or possibly around changes in prescription opioid prescribing.
So one of the things you'll see if you drive around town is there's a billboard that says theft in Colorado has gone down 12% since marijuana was legalized. Now I ask you, if I put up a billboard that said theft has gone up 12% in Colorado since marijuana was legalized, therefore marijuana causes theft, you'd say, what are you, an idiot? So again, we can't make irresponsible arguments based on certain trends to support our concern about marijuana. The flip side's true too, right? We can't use improper statistics to justify a legalization process.
And I'd like to add to that too. Governor Will convened an opioid task force, a leader in the nation, to try and tackle the overprescription, oversupply of opioids flowing through the communities. So I'm predicting now we're going to see opioid overdoses going down in this state because we've been working super hard to try and make that happen. A pharmacist friend told me that the reasons that we're going to see improvement here have nothing to do with the legalization of marijuana. They did some things, they strictly curtailed the size of the prescription. They let customers not have to take full doses. They actually upscaled because of the potential for abuse was so clear. They moved it from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 2 drug because abuse was clearly widespread. So we're going to see, not on whatever, say a prayer, a reduction in opioid overdoses in Massachusetts, and it's not because marijuana is legal, it's because we worked really hard to try and tackle the opioid overdose problem.
Okay. Marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug, therefore prohibited from academic medical research. Should marijuana be reclassified federally to allow research?
The DEA, a year and a half ago, changed the regulations so that substantially more research can be done on marijuana. And everybody agrees that there should be research on marijuana as a pain reliever and as a medical cure. And, you know, I think that, look, if my mother had cancer, I get her a medical marijuana card too, right? I mean, the sort of political and social view that there may be a medical and pain relief value in marijuana is overwhelmingly supported by people. But that has nothing to do with commercialization and legalization. We already have a very open medical marijuana access policy in Massachusetts. So when people start to talk about the medical aspects of this, it's really a smokescreen for ignoring the underlying and separate commercialization issue.
I get asked this question a lot too, and I'm reminded that Dr. Nora Bokov told us that there's been over 600 or 700 studies done on the drug not in the recent past, in 70 book chapters. There's a lot of research happening on marijuana, and I think the federal government is taking steps to make sure that more is done. Just a little bit of folk wisdom though, harkening back to my days on the farm and my days out in the Midwest, and my uncle who was governor of the state for 2 terms, and those arcs of harm that I showed you. My state set up a sugar research council, and my state set up a lignite coal research council. They served to increase the production and supply of sugar and sale of sugar, and to increase the extraction of strip mining lignite coal in the western part of the state. So when I hear about industry-sponsored research, that's what my life history has taught me about the outcomes sometimes when research is driven by commercial interests.
Okay, awesome. Thank you to our panelists. So can we give them another round of